Now, welcome to week 5. No, week 6. I know that part's a little hard figuring out where we are in the semester, but it's week 6. You can find this on the Moodle board, and we're doing elements of design. Today's Profcast, we're going to look at several elements, 7 in fact, elements of design, things that I think are good ways of thinking about why we see many of the same things as being beautiful or helpful in the way that things are designed. Okay, so we're going to use art, but also a little bit of photography and advertising to get this done. Now, I want to start with our artist that we featured in our syllabus, Paul Lewin, whose artwork we've used throughout the syllabus and in other aspects of the course. And I thought this was a pretty great quotation page. I thought this was kind of a lovely piece. I think it's gorgeous art. But what does the original painting itself do? Like, how does that work? Like, what makes it beautiful or evocative or disturbing or surprising or alluring? What makes it work as art? The same thing with this quotation from the syllabus about what they tell you versus what you find out for yourself, and a really important kind of feature. When we pull out that design element, what do you see going on here? What's the story? When we look at other parts of Paul Lewin's art, what do we see that makes us think that this is good art? What draws us in? Where's the story? What's happening here? And then what are the design principles at play? This piece as well, I think, is a great one for asking the question of, like, what's going on? Like, why do we have universes and weird monkeys and animals and skulls? And what's the aesthetic? What's happening? This is another piece in that same similar kind of attitude, this kind of expression that we see. Another piece from his Instagram page where we see this kind of water moving out. This one has the African look, but also has this kind of Indian feel, subcontinental India thing. This is a whole other sort of color aesthetic in the background that works into the foreground, but it's also really in the same tone. Here is a gorgeous picture, one that caught my eye the first time I saw it. I think it's an incredible piece of artwork, and is actually, notice, the book cover for this great work of literary criticism, thinking about the way that stories, black characters in stories, the way that they're portrayed on film. It's an awesome book, just great book. Here's another bit of Paul Lewin's work to bring Octavia Butler, a black writer, a science fiction writer, to bring her work into the world. I think this is a great pair of books. Another piece here, notice kind of the elements that we see, kind of what makes this work, what's connecting, what's going on here. And when we pull back to the fuller piece, we see he made this on a piece of wood, so you can't really photograph it. Okay, well, what's going on in all these pieces? What makes them work? So we're going to talk about 7 elements of design. There's many elements and principles of design, photography, and artwork, and I'm not an expert in these. So what I'm going to do is take 7 that I find helpful in looking at design and considering it. Okay, one, this famous picture here, this painting, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper from the 1490s. And we can see here that this is a great example of balance, symmetrical balance, the symmetry. Do you see this? See how the 2 halves of the table have a kind of symmetry, like you're opening a book. The rest of the building, the whole rest of this upper room, also has that symmetry. It follows the same sort of thing, like you're opening a book or you're looking in on the scene from where you're sitting watching this. It allows all the focus then to come to this character, to Christ, who's breaking the bread, sharing the wine on the night before he was betrayed. So all of that's there, and we can even see here in the distance that splits the entire picture. So there's symmetry top and bottom. In the distance, there's actually this kind of land, the world out there is inviting us past Christ out into the world. Okay, there's all kinds of other things going on about character and about the story of Christ in this particular picture, but this is a great picture of symmetrical balance. And I think you can see what I mean by symmetry, symmetrical, and balance, right? When I show you a picture of the Taj Mahal, right, from the 17th century. It took, I don't know, maybe 30 years to build, I think. The Taj Mahal is like a work of architectural art, just this brilliant piece of architecture, and remains symmetrical. They use all these features of symmetry, and you can actually approach the building from different directions and find aspects of symmetry. It's almost like you can, not quite, but almost like you can fold the page in half. And notice that this line up the center of this particular pool increases that particular illusion as it aligns with, in this photograph, right up to the top of the cupula, right? Cupula. Okay. Now, symmetry in design works really well in other aspects, and we could do a lot on photography, but look here in advertising. Look at this pair of Nike shoes, right? Do you see the symmetry that exists there? Well, there is a kind of symmetry when you have this. This looks like a photo that has a mirror in the center, like they're moving apart. There's a kind of symmetry that exists here. The right and left already form a symmetry, but they switch them left and right here, and actually have tiny bits of non-symmetry. The lace moving into the background here. Okay, the idea of the woven. This is notice the repeating design. We're going to come back to this in a bit. We can see this symmetry here that exists here. It's not that both sides have to be the same, but there is a kind of symmetrical balance to the whole. Now, we can find symmetrical balance and then asymmetrical balance when we move to Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night. Okay, this famous painting. I got to see this painting once. And we see that, well, this isn't balanced. Like, notice look at the way that the bush, this whole bush, kind of pulls the whole painting to one side. We want to say that there is some reorientation. And what pulls it back, what gives us a balance that still exists there is, well, we've got the moon, and we've got this rock facing here, and then the open fields, and then we have this church steeple here at the center of things, right below the swirly bit in the sky. That all brings it back into balance. It's balanced, but it's not side-by-side symmetry. Do you see the thing? So we have symmetrical design, almost like opening a book and seeing mirror images, and asymmetrical design. You still have balance, but it's not equals. It's not equals of visual equals. It's not sameness. It's another kind of balance that exists there. We can see these things too with the Nuksuks, which is a northern First Nation and Inuit, a particular expression of community, art, spirituality. It was used for the 2010 Olympics in the Olympic flag. It's part of the flag of one of our northern territories in Canada. And these gardens here in Nova Scotia, Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia, there's this gorgeous photo by Sean M. Kent, who takes this picture. And the Inukshuks themselves, notice they, in one sense, they're very much like crosses or like stick people, but they're not symmetrical. They're never exactly set up to be the same on all sides. There's a misbalance there, even though there's a balance of the whole, right? So each Inukshuk has a kind of asymmetrical balance. But this photo also has asymmetrical balance, because although we have weight over here in the front, like this is the main feature, it's over only on one side. The other side, we have this sense of distance pulling the whole painting away and giving it a kind of balance. It's very cool. We can see this in advertising very clearly in some ways. I love this poster for The Dark Knight. I think it's a gorgeous way of showing the asymmetrical balance, like Joker and Batman, how they work together in identity formation so they become something. And I love to see that element that's there. Here we have an imbalance, you would think, right? So the apples don't weigh the same if you weigh them. They're not the same number, but the color and the little bit of green that you see on the right then creates this kind of asymmetrical balance so that the picture doesn't seem disjointed or throw us off. Now, we've seen patterns in this symmetry and asymmetry in balance. We're also going to see movement, and that's the next piece, is movement. And the best, I think, visual way to see movement is to see it here in this Starry Night. Do you see how that gives this illusion? You understand the painting itself isn't moving, but we can imagine the movement in our eyes. We can actually see not just the sweep of the Starry Night, the skies, the planets' emotions, the eons moving across our identity, but you can also almost see like the wind moving across grasses and hills. There's this whole kind of move. And then this brushing up, like this bush that's in front of us is going to catch flame and go to heaven, or is on its way to the sky, whatever, right? There's a kind of movement all over this piece. We can see movement in things that are absolutely still. This is the Pieta by Michelangelo, also from the 1490s. And this famous painting has, do you see the cross that's across there, how it creates the picture of the cross. This is Mary holding the body of Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, her son. And see how it creates that cruciform, that cross-shaped image there. And yet there's a kind of falling into her lap. There's a kind of her releasing him to God. There's this kind of movement in the piece, even though it's absolutely still. This piece is studied by artists throughout the world. I was amazed. I was in Chicago, and Marc Chagall, who's the artist here, is one of my favorite artists ever, a Jewish artist. And his white crucifixion, I came around the corner and it filled this entire wall in the Chicago Institute of Art. It just blew. I just stood there for a long, long time. And see, we still have the cross here, the cross image of Christ. Very much a crucifixion in the way that we understand things. And look at the movement around here. There's the spirits that are escaping as they're murdered. We've got people fleeing from the army, houses being destroyed, people on boats. There's actually people moving out here, the sense of the wandering Jewish person always looking for their destiny. And then, of course, people fleeing and the flames moving upwards like smoke into the sky. All that movement going on in this piece while Christ is still on the cross. It's an intriguing. Movement is also captured often in kind of a funnel kind of thing. This is descending staircase as a nice design movement, but watch how the same movement is being used in advertising. Do you see that? Now, this advertising is actually for a wellness, like to move, right? And they have a series of athletes and dancers and things creating these movements. The piece isn't moving. It's our imagination. We invest movement into it. But movement is there. And notice that it follows this same kind of spiral center movement. Do you see that? And we saw that on the Starry Night. Do you see that? The spiral to movement. Okay. We follow this in movement. Do you see how there's a kind of moving around of the story here that focuses on Christ and the cross? This spiral to center is a very important part of art. It's mimicked here, this movement. We have to complete the movement with our mind. And then it's actually used here and then interrupted, really in quite a good way, by a cleaning agent of some kind. The cup is spilling. It's not really spilling. It's a picture that doesn't move. And yet we can imagine the spilling. So the movement, the cleaning that's happened, that second movement, also imaginary, fixes in our mind. Now, when it comes to advertising, of course, what's more famous than this moving logo? This logo moves. It is on the move. The Nike logo is a sense of that forward motion, speed, fitness, whatever. It has that imagination in us because it has that sense of movement to it, even though it's absolutely still. And we can see this even the changing in the way that your brand identity wants to change. In the 1960s, the famous American tractor company and lawn care company, they had a John Deere. It was named after a person, and so they added a deer about 100 years ago to the logo, and now the deer is leaping. So in 1967, the deer is leaping and landing. Notice that the important thing was a sense of security, a sense of purpose and where you're going. In this case, notice in 30 years later, they redesign it and the deer is leaping and going forward. Notice the sense that John Deere is an old company, but it's got a forward-moving mentality. You may think I'm just making this up, but they tested this with thousands of people and they all felt like, when they saw this one, that John Deere was a progressive company. When they saw this one, colored the same, they felt like John Deere was just an old brand. So it makes a difference. Okay, movement. Now let's go to perspective. There's two kinds of things I want to talk about perspective is what is the painting making us see, and then who are we in the painting, if in the advertisement, if we are. Notice the perspective here. This is actually a painted ceiling, right? So it has this kind of bent perspective. Everything's moving us down the hallway. Okay, everything is moving forward at this monastery photo. It's really kind of bright and gorgeous. Do you see the lines, how they go to the end? Here's another one that's even, in a sense, more obvious. All the lines in this painting move towards that window. Everything's kind of bending towards the window. There's kind of lines there. You can actually quite literally, draw the lines that exist across these spaces and create this array that goes towards the windows. Okay, the kind of piece this is, by the way, Van Gogh's piece, Van Gogh piece, The Chamber. Now we can see this perspective. We can see this line in this cross. The crucifixion, obviously, is an important feature of Western art. See this triangle that's created here? Do you see that perfect triangle between the two hands and the feet? See that perfect triangle? And then how that's replicated with a different, an isosceles triangle, right, down to the base of the cross. All of that then features our eyes down towards the sea, down towards the boat, okay? See how that all moves, all of our vision? So, but notice the perspective here. It's like we're God's vision or the angel's vision looking down from the cross down onto the earth. But now look at this painting and take your hand and cover the top half of the painting. And I got to see this painting in New York. It just thrilled me to see it. When you look at just the bottom painting, our whole perspective, it says, we're made to look at this boat and then out across the water to the mountains. Do you see that? When you cut that painting off, we lose the perspective, the God perspective, the angelic perspective, Christ's perspective looking down on earth. And now we're looking out across the water. Isn't that amazing, this dual perspective painting? So what advertisement is meant to do when it's using perspective is to give us either dual perspective, we see things in different ways, or to allow us to invite us into the story. So here's FedEx talking about how they deliver packages. I think this is a pretty brilliant photo, right? So this looks like somebody just handing somebody a package from apartment to an apartment, okay? But it has a whole map of the world. And it's actually, see, going from one country or continent to another country or continent. That's super clever. That is just a great piece of design work. Okay. Here's another perspective piece. What are we looking at? We're looking at the inside of someone's home. It's a homeless campaign. This is the inside of a box, right? For, 500,000 people in the United States, they sleep in a box at night. Okay, so this is a way of bending perspective, making us think in new ways, and advertising can be very effective that way. Another way of changing perspective, we're going to do a couple on contrast as a design element. One aspect of contrast is juxtaposition. Now, this is where you just put two things together that don't mix normally, that don't fit normally, and what comes out of them. This picture by Magritte, René Magritte, is The Son of Man. It's a very famous painting, but where we have the apple right in front of the sort of the businessman's face there. Just this great juxtaposition. You don't often find a green apple growing out of someone's face. It's not normal, right? So that sense of two things that are fitting together but don't really fit together. Here's one. This is a gorgeous piece by this is Sylvia Paul's The Thinker. And here we have a juxtaposition of different actually art modes. So we actually have, to see here, bits of like posters and things that were taken from books or whatever, different kinds of words. So that particular media that's put against a background, but notice that there's like wood-like designs in the background here that repeat. Okay. And then there's still a painting that's been superimposed over on top and beneath the different elements torn from magazines and from posters on the street and things. So the juxtaposition of different elements used to make the piece. I think that's a pretty effective kind of juxtaposition. Also, notice the broad blue versus red with the pinkish or yellowish skin color as the centerpiece. I think that works pretty well. Here's another juxtaposition. It's a gorgeous photograph. To be able to pull that off, bringing the lips together and then creating a completely non-symmetrical but entirely focused piece. Great use of juxtaposition. Here's another one that's a great perspective piece in just normal realistic photography where you have, it looks like children are playing inside of a bicycle wheel, miniature children, but it's a good use of large and small, which is the juxtaposition that we see often can be used in photography for art, surprise, or humor. Here's another juxtaposition that we see in architecture, old and new, but also so notice the symmetry of these buildings here. This is in France, the Louvre in France, this ancient, not that ancient, medieval into modern museum. And then we have this amazing a pyramid, which is completely new material, completely different kind of material than anywhere else. The lighting is different. Everything changes, and it actually opens up the entire bottom of the Louvre up out into the air and changes the whole experience of the Louvre, bringing postmodern and modern together with the ancient and the pre-modern. I think it's a pretty great, but it also brings brick and stone together with glass and steel. It's really nice there. And then, of course, straight walls, rectangles, that form together with triangles, so that even here where we do have like squares, as we do here in the windows, however, they're tilted sideways and they're cut in half so they look like triangles. I think it's just awesome. I would love to go. I haven't been there. Juxtaposition can also be used to rock an advertisement. So here's what you wouldn't expect. It's a bullet, presumably going through the air, a sense of motion there. But the end of the bullet is actually a pencil. So words kill wars. So this is the Ukraine-Russia dialogue for peace. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Here, Heinz Ketchup has a whole bunch of design ads, by the way, that you could study just on their own. No one grows ketchup like Heinz, so they're basically trying to remind people that Heinz Ketchup is basically tomatoes and sugar. And so they want to show tomatoes, and so here they've cut up a Heinz bottle like a tomato. It's a pretty great surprise. Or this. Would you expect this? Right? Porcupine. Really sensitive moment. What happens when the porcupine touches one of the bags with a goldfish in it? Right. Disaster. Well, Volkswagen helps you park, right? It's really hard to parallel park. This is a pretty cool design. Volkswagen has some great designs. Now, another contrast would be light and dark contrast. This great Che Guevara poster, revolutionary poster. We can see the light and the dark, so that it actually has something that looks like a negative image, but it's actually it's not a flip image. It's actually the image from the painting. Okay, we can see Andy Warhol playing with that, right, and creating a whole bunch of these, creating the Marilyn Monroe response. He becomes this pop culture icon, but this is all color contrast, like very firm, hard contrast between different colors. There's nothing that blends here, right? Notice we see this too with Barack Obama's 2008 campaign. Here's his campaign poster, Hope. Now there's a tiny bit of blending here. Do you see the blending there? But the point is the contrast of light and shadow. Well, he's a black man running for politics in the United States. There's no sense hiding the contrast. But he also wants to contrast himself over against his opponents. He's trying to ground himself in hope, but it's not just a fuzzy hope that, everything will be better if we just get together, but it's actually a hope that's grounded in real elements that he has to fight for. There are sharp distinctions, right? This is not, I'm just the best guy and everybody looks the same, is the campaign. There are distinctives here. At least that's what he's pitching, right? You can judge him now as a president. He finished, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, he's been in office. Another element of contrast, again, here's some strong contrast that exists, but also beginning to see what we see as repetitive patterns. The use of colors, and I just love pattern art. It can be super, super well done. But I wanted to hint at this because this also has softer contrast where the things start to blend into one another, which we're not focusing as much on this week. This piece here, repetition. So we move, now this is a light dark contrast piece. Can you see how the white pops on this? But it's a grayscale piece. Nothing's really black and nothing's really white. And yet those stool covers pop. The use of repeating elements in art can be really effective. Here's an old Gustav Klimt painting. This is the Tree of Life from about 110 years ago or so, 1910, 1911. And we can see here how he is sort of you can see this, but notice the little swirls that repeat all the way through. There are other patterns that repeat, triangles here, squares here, eyeballs or something like that, but I think we can see repetition there. Repetition can be used in photography. Isn't this a great picture? This is such a gorgeous picture by Hologi, and I love this picture. Great use, and then the way that pink gets repeated as it goes through, just super great, including just the way that the light, falls upon the subject's skin and the socks and things like that. Super well done. You can see in book design, not in advertising a lot, there's not a lot of repetition, but in book design, there's a lot of this. Angela Carter's a writer I really quite like. She retells fairy tales and old stories into new ways. We can see repetition and design in some art pieces. There's a hand cream. Notice that the hand cream moves out into the world beyond it. which is what you would expect in every hand cream. You're supposed to, in this case, get the coconut and aloe experience of actually being, I don't know, in a jungle or something, whatever. But also, here's a beer ad here. Notice, like, you may not, if you first glance, this looks like a lighthouse and sand or rocks along the sand, but this is actually 1,000 guys holding up beers. It's maybe the same guy. He's very tired, I guess. So this is a Canadian beer commercial, and there's a handful of these. There's one for the prairies and wheat fields. It's kind of cool. All right. Okay, so that's a quick go through these 7 elements of design: symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, movement, perspective, juxtaposition, contrast, and repetition. Okay, what features do we see in this? Now, this is a photograph from the Abbey Road album by the Beatles. Now, what's really interesting about this album is, of course, there were no words on it. There were no names on it. We see different elements. So, for example, repetition, like we see the lines here that move through the cars and the trees. So there is a kind of repetition of elements here that quite literally then keep that symmetrical balance. Notice that this line goes through and bends and gives us kind of 2 halves to the street. We see the lined cars on the sides also do this sort of thing, giving this so that we've got the perspective, right, that goes right back to that triangle that we talked about earlier. However, is it a symmetrical or asymmetrical? Well, the guys walking, the 4 Beatles walking, in one sense, they're all following a pattern, but there's actually asymmetry. So here we have bare feet, a cigarette, long hair versus shorter hair, beards, different kinds of clothing. So even though it's completely symmetrical in the sense that everybody's doing the same pattern, notice that left, right? See the feet? Okay. Yet it's completely different. It's non-repetitive. So there is some asymmetry, and it's not quite a straight line. The street bends a little bit. Abbey Road isn't perfectly straight because no street in England is perfectly straight. Notice the sense of movement. I didn't tell you that they were posing there. I told you they were walking. There is a sense of movement in the street. And that car is going to hit them. They're all going to die maybe or something. People walking on the street. Everything else seems still except they're walking. And I think that works out pretty well. We've talked about perspective. What about juxtaposition? And I'm not sure, like, to me, the white suit versus the blue jeans, the difference is I think the bare feet is sort of a juxtaposition. But in this, there's nothing meant to be sort of like surprising, except that we keep reading and looking at this picture, and so maybe that's a surprise, okay? So you see how you can talk about different elements in each piece and they won't kind of contradict. So think of those 7 elements when it comes to this piece, which is Kokusai's Wave. This is a Japanese artist from the early, the Great Wave off Kanagawa from 1931. And Kokusai was a Japanese artist. This is just at the point that Japan is about to enter back into the world connection at the end of a period of silence, 250 years or so of silence. And we have here certain perspectives that are very classic. We have here some Japanese fishermen out on the waves. The waves can be really intense. This is not really a tsunami. There's nothing that defines it as one, but that's what people think of them as. And then we have Fuji, Fuji-san, Mr. Fuji, the great mountain Fuji is there as like a feature element, okay? Now, how do we look at this? When we think of this as, I would use it as asymmetrical balance. I actually meant to get rid of that. So this is totally not 2 parts of a page. This is a complete asymmetrical balance. That's absolutely true. But notice the contrast. We've got hard contrasts of colors. Though we have some blends, some white to blue. It's all hard contrast in order to get these really rippling waves and things like that. But notice the use of repetition. What color are the fishermen's jackets? Same color as the waves. What color is the mountain? Same color as the waves. What color is the writing to sign the painting? Same color as the waves. You see the thing? I mean, what a disastrous thing to do for fishermen to go out and wear wave-colored clothing when they go fishing. That doesn't make any sense. And yet it works super well in this painting. The hard contrast is there. Do you see the movement, right? See all this movement? This wave's coming and it's about to crash in. Fuji's at still, totally still. And these guys are on top of the waves, and they're in big trouble. Notice the continuity, too, of the boats and the sky color. Super great. We actually see these bubbles. They're not just in air, they're falling. There's movement all over this piece. Okay, so we've got juxtaposition. What's the juxtaposition? Well, Fuji's huge, yet this is a wave, looks way bigger. Notice how bringing the wave up to the close perspective makes Fuji, which is this giant mountain that looks like a mountain, looks like what every kid would draw a mountain to be, see the juxtaposition there. Okay, we talked about color contrast, we talked about repetition, we talked about movement. What about perspective? Now, what's really interesting about this painting, where are we looking? We're actually not looking at Japan looking out on the world, which is typical for Japanese photography or painting. We're looking at Japan from the perspective of the other parts of the world. We're looking in on Japan across the Japanese tradition out through to Mount Fuji, Fujisan. It's an amazing perspective piece, but look how asymmetrical it is. And so what one aspect of design that's really helpful in photography and things is to do a 3x3 grid, a 9-point grid, to talk about the rule of thirds. Notice how most of the weight of the photo is actually down here in the bottom third of the painting. Okay, so that's there. But notice how the bits of the corners and stuff, what they do, they tend to capture where there's action taking place, right? The cresting wave here, the cresting and falling wave here. Notice how and notice the turning movement. We talked about the spiral. Notice how when we put this grid on, how it focuses in on that entire movement. It makes the whole thing kind of sing. It's pretty cool. So the design element, the rule of thirds, is great for photography. When you hold up your camera, it'll sometimes give you this 9-box grid so that you can take pictures in thirds. We're going to talk about this live in class on Wednesday. There's going to be, by the way, so this is Profcast 1. Those are the 7 elements of design that we talked about. These are what you're going to be doing a activity response on. However, there's a part 2 of this project. We're going to have a conversation, a second one of these videos, a little shorter, a little bit more fun, that's just about like album covers, okay? But we'll come back to that, and that will come out later tonight. And here are some of the album covers we're going to be looking at. Let's come back to Paul Lewin's artwork. And what your activity for this week is this. Okay, what we want you to do is go to Paul Lewin's Instagram page or his website, select a photo, get one of his photos, and I want you to create a response where you have to give three different of the 7 elements in one of these paintings, any one of the paintings, and you do it yourself. You're going to create a slide that has these elements. It has the painting, it has the description of where you found the painting, and it's got the 3 different elements with a brief description of each. Okay. Now I'm going to give an example of this. This is a photo here by Jean-Michel Basquiat, I guess. I assume it might be John Michael, but I think it's Jean-Michel Basquiat from the Roubaix Museum. It's called Bird on Money, although some people call it Bird on the Money. Anyway, Bird on Money. It's a painting from about 40 years ago. And I think it really has different elements. I like it because it's the Strokes album, the New Abnormal. I just love that Strokes album from a couple of years ago, and they used it here, but of course they moved it into a vinyl-sized kind of square design. Here's the original, more rectangular one. So it has asymmetrical balance, okay? Notice if we fold this picture in half, they're not the same half. And you can, I'm going to say these things, but you can read them here. Notice the use of 2 different blues, this teal and the light blue, and 2 different yellows, this pale yellow and this bright yellow. Notice that brightness and lightness that's going on there. So we actually have that sort of contrast between those 2 things. Notice here on the left that the yellow and the blue each kind of fade to the background and get scratched all over in a way that almost makes them disappear. But over here, the scratching on the yellow and the blue don't make them disappear like it does here in this middle black and white space. Okay, we have this asymmetrical design that allows in the end the bird head and the bird heart to kind of pop in the middle. So that works out really well. And notice there's like this cruciform, this bird, see the wings, the heart, the body of the bird. Notice how that actually looks like a cross, that, you know, how the crucifix is part of Western culture. So that's there as well. There's movement. If you actually follow this looks like an arrow. Do you see this? This black down in the corner moving across to the foot. If you actually follow that, it's a really nice swirl to the center, to the heart. And I don't know if that's a shark. I'm not sure what that is. It's a graffiti type art. So it brings us, like the balance part, to the heart. And then third, there's repetition. Notice the circular scratches, the peace signs, scratching of a bird's foot, eyeballs, squiggles. It's graffiti, but all of this is to honor a jazz artist, and this is jazz graffiti. You think it's nonsense, it's going nowhere, but it all means something. That's what jazz music really is. It sounds to us who don't know jazz very well that it doesn't mean anything, but it does, okay? So you're going to go to Paul Lewin's work, and you're going to select something and make a slide like this, pop it into Google Slides. The link is on Moodle. And add that within an hour before your class on Wednesday. You can use, by the way, if you want to use audio or video to help explain what you're talking about, you can do that. Just make sure it works in the Google Slide element, okay? Make sure that works. If you want to do less writing and more just talking, feel free to use Google Slides. Allows you to add audio or video. Do that if you want. You don't have to write these things. If you write them, these elements have to be there. You have to have the 3 elements. You have to have a painting. You have to tell me what the painting's name is, where it's from, where you got it. And you have to have your name on the slide, or I have no idea who you are, and you get 0%. This project replaces your quiz. There's no extra readings, although watch for that. I'm going to have a note on that. And there's no other activities. This is the only activity for the week. It is your quiz mark for the week, is making this 1 slide, 3 design elements from 1 painting with all the details we need. Okay, so where does this fit in with your week? Okay, so, So what you're going to do is there's no readings, but there's going to be a part 2 of this Profcast on the album covers later tonight. That's coming out. The recording with the partner that I'm working with is later tonight. I also want you to find one YouTube video on either elements of design or principles of photography, anything that you would like. Just educate yourself for 10 or 15 minutes on these things as a way of giving background. No physical reading for those things today. Okay. These are the 7 elements of design. Come to class prepared to talk about those. The activity is just the Elements of Design Paul Lewin project. Add to the Google slide presentation on Moodle. 1 slide. 3 elements of design about 1 Paul Lewin painting. Okay. Remember Wednesday, October 26th, there's going to be a Canva tutorial by my son, Nicholas Dickinson. I'll send out the details about where that is. It's about half hour of teaching and then some workshop time together. It's going to be in a workshop room somewhere on campus. And then, of course, on class after Wednesday, this week we're tweeting about discoveries of design. And then your planning day, everything begins again on Friday, okay? So, as always, if you have any questions or you need to connect, reach out to me here at my details, and I really look forward to Wednesday. We will have a very fun and practical discussion about design. On Wednesday, you have to come with a camera. Now, you can bring a nice fancy camera, however, your phones will probably have a pretty good camera, and we're going to do some photography projects on Wednesday as well. Okay, we will see you on Wednesday. Take care.